So I've had a couple people ask about the way I do my gear ascensions. I figured I'd throw a video together and like kind of show you the way I farm the stuff. The main thing we're going to do is kind of put a bunch of points into different aspects of the altar, but we're going to go into the skeleton key dungeons. And what's important about them is that there are two chests that drop that are going to be the ascendant troves. That's going to drop 2 ashes for 1 dungeon. And then the bosses and all the elites and things like that, they're going to drop a bunch of the echoes. We can transfer the echoes to fragments and things like that. So we'll take a look, we'll jump in, and I'll show you what I do. Now that we're in the first stage of the dungeon, we really want to make sure that we find all of the elites and all the monsters that are scattered throughout the level. Because you can only do the key dungeons once per like login, and you have to log out, you have to make sure that you do get everything from these. We see on the map here we have the first of our troves coming up. This area right here, the trial, is pretty nice. It has a lot of different monsters that spawn in it. Alright, there's our first Soul Echo and our first Ash of Awakening. Sometimes you get 2 in these, sometimes I guess you get 1. But there will be another one here at the end. And I think on each map there's also one as well, but I can't quite remember. Oh, perfect timing. We have a Nemesis here. Those are going to be good for drops as well. We really should be able to face tank all the Nemesis that come up. They don't seem to be too big of an issue. Just gotta make sure that we manage our Dreeg and our pots. Alright, we got our first Tempest Totem here. Let's take a gander and see what we get from it. These are usually pretty tough. There's going to be a lot of spam on the floor, so we're going to have to kite a little bit. The best idea here is to try to minimize the amount of incoming damage, so kill the weakest ones first, and then you can focus on the bosses. The Storm Talons actually do a surprising amount of damage, even though they're just like regular enemies. These guys have nullification as well, so gotta be aware of that. Currently the build I'm running, if I get nullified, I lose a lot of my poison and my physical resist. Alright, after the totem, we're sitting at 3 and 3 for the ashes and the echoes. One of the better things here is that this dungeon seems to run this boss more often than not, and we have a pretty good matchup against it. Man, when that Doom Bolt hits, it looks so good. It like chunks, I don't know, a fifth of their health down completely. Now, when I go to farm the Asters up in the Pinnacle and stuff like that, I usually will throw the Ascension modifiers on here, and then we're going to increase our chances for the Fragment and the Tempest Totems. You can do this stuff as well through the roguelike dungeons. Some of it is much more difficult, but it does pay off much better. When I'm looking for the Asters, I'll teleport to the Pinnacle, and I usually run through here, and then I'll jump down and go to the Highlands and stuff like that. but based on what I have ran through so far, it's really generous when it comes to dropping the material. Like we just got one frozen Aster and we just stepped foot into the door. And on the map, there's going to be Asters right here, and then up here. They're not always there, but usually one or two of them are, and you can go ahead and reload, and then just go there again and grab them. So we have the bloom here. Grab that one. And then we have the bloom here. Unlucky, didn't get anything. And oftentimes there is another one right over here as well. So you can just teleport to this area and then run through this little section here. There's usually a boss or two that spawns, so you have a chance to grab some random ashes or souls that will drop from him, but then you can also grab those along the way. Highly efficient farming route for that part. From running one single key dungeon with no modifiers on it, and then running through the Highlands and the Pinnacle, we ended up getting 11 of the Ashes, 18 of the Soul Echoes, 15 of the Frozen Asters, one of the Aspects, and then some other miscellaneous stuff along the way. So that kind of route right there is really good. If you key dungeon and you do all the modifiers as well, you get a lot more for it. You do need a significantly stronger build if you're going to modify the entire altar and then jump into the key dungeons, but even without that, you still get quite a bit of stuff. And then once you're out of that, you can modify the overland world and just play through a maxed out altar here. As you play through the Highlands and the Pinnacle, those are going to have different bosses and elites that are going to drop the different kinds of echoes and the ashes, as well as the Tempest totems while you're trying to farm up the asters. If I had to estimate how long this took, I would probably say between 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, something like that. And I wasn't really beelining for everything. The most optimal thing to do is ignore everything that you find unless you're looking for the totems or the bosses or the asters, and you don't engage with a lot of these smaller monsters. This forge will allow you to create the aspects of Baranoth with the Asters, and then it also allow you to craft the soul fragments using the soul echoes. This makes it much easier. You can find these Asters all over the place, and then if you modify the altar so that you're increasing the drop rate of your souls, you're going to get a ton of these, and it's going to be much easier to transfer those into soul fragments. Now let's go over a summary of what I usually do. The first thing I do is I jump into the key dungeons. I usually knock out a couple of those. Um, Sometimes I modify them, sometimes I don't. The thing is, if you die while you're in the key dungeon, you get locked out, so you're not going to get access to the Ascendant chest at the end of it. If you want the safest bet, don't modify the key dungeons, you just do them as they are. You still get good loot from them, and then once you're done with those, come back, modify the altar, fill up all of the modification slots. Usually I lean toward trying to grab as many echoes as I can. It takes the most when you're going to do the initial ascension, and then if you're going to look for the ascension rerolls, that's also going to be required for the fragments. For the route there, I usually start down through the Frostvale Highlands, and then I run up, I go through the mountains, and I go through the Freyal Valley. Here is where I showed you those three spots where the Frost Asters spawn, so I usually go through here, and then I make my way back to Kernhold. By the end of that route, I have quite a bit of materials, and it's usually a good session. If I want to do it again, I'll log out, log back in, and then I'll roll through the key dungeons again, and I'll go through the same exact route. And then one thing I also add sometimes is up here in the Aurora Peaks and the Pinnacle, they have a lot of the Aster spawns as well as good high level enemies and then totem spawns if you're going to be running those. So there wraps up my video about my farming routes and how I do this exactly. If you have any questions about farming or the new stuff that came with Fangs, like the Ascension and rerolling, feel free to ask anything in the comments below. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.